Hey, my friends, welcome back to episode 8, The Level. We are really jumping into this really interesting topic that most of my leaders in construction struggle with, called anger management. How do you do it? How do you do it? So in our previous segment, the takeoff, we talked about having the right mindset to manage anger. So we talked about the right mindset. We talked about anger and health issues, as well as how it breaks teams down. And so if you haven't heard that, go back and check that out so you can get caught up. I encourage you to check that out before you dive into this segment here. Now, as we jump into the level, we want to really dive into this thing called having the right skill set to manage anger. So it's one way to think about anger, but the next one is, okay, now when I have the right mindset to handle anger, now I have to have the right skills. What are skills? And I'm gonna be honest with you. These are things that no one teaches us in school. We're like, what the hell are they teaching us in school? They teach you certain things, but they don't teach you how to manage and how to have the right skills to handle anger, right? So what are those skills? Well, the first thing is this. Number one, you must separate the trigger from the cause. You gotta separate the trigger from the cause and understand this, my friends, that the trigger is something inside of you, right? The cause is something else. So understand, the person that has brought a highlight to your anger is just a trigger. They've triggered something inside of you, like, hey, why am I pissed off right now, right? They're not the real cause of things. Now, in order to do a great job, you have to dig deep to say, well, why am I triggered and what's the real cause of my anger going on inside of me right now, right? So when you can separate the trigger from the cause, you don't just go off on the person because you realize that the person really and truthfully is just a trigger highlighting something on the inside of you to help you out with what's going on, right? Now, the next thing is having the right skill set. You have to kind of pivot after you separate the trigger from the cause to understand what we like to call the 4 real sources of anger. The 4 real sources of anger. Now, the 4 real sources of anger, oftentimes, I will go as far to say 85% of the time, your anger comes from one of 4 places, my friends. One of 4 places. Usually fear, shame, guilt, or sadness. Most anger comes from one of those 4 places: fear, guilt, shame, or sadness, right? I know you're challenging me on this and you're like, well, whatever, what is that? Doesn't make sense. Well, pause with me for a second. Let's do a hypothetical scenario, right? Let's go back to what we talked about in segment 1, a lazy worker who shows up late to work, doesn't do a great job. Let's talk about that. Let's use that as an example. As a general foreman, when I see a journeyman wireman showing up late to work, really not doing a great job with the pace of work, what happens? Well, I'm triggered, right? You're triggered with that. But if you can separate it and say, hey, wait a minute, this person just highlighted something in me. What's the real source? And then when you can go to step 2 for having the right skill set and say, well, what's the real source of my anger? And you think about those 4. Of those 4, my friends, who are tuning into us right now, of the 4, which of the 4 do you think are really driving the general foreman or the superintendent? Fear, guilt, shame, or sadness? Watching this lazy worker who's slow, who's late, which of the 4? Well, I challenge you to think about this. I like to say a couple of them. Number 1, fear. Fear is driving the leader in this situation. Why? Well, fear of not getting the job done, fear of falling behind pace on the schedule, fear of looking weak in front of other workers, fear of being taken advantage of and people seeing this one worker show up late and do half-ass work and then everyone else doing it. So all of a sudden now, fear is driving me, right? This behavior that the person did triggered me. The fear inside of me is driving me, right? As a result of that. I would say the other is shame. The fear of being shamed in front of other workers as well, right? Now, once you have separated the trigger from the cause, right? Once you have dove deep within yourself to look at those 4 areas of anger, say, which of the 4 is really driving me right now? The next one, step 3, to have the right skill set is to really communicate assertively what's going on with you. Hear me out. Not with them, with you. Let's practice really quickly. So in that same situation that we're talking about right now, it will be me going to this person and say, hey, listen, I'm fearful that if you continually show up late, and work at the pace that you're working, we're going to fall behind production schedule, and it's going to affect a lot of jobs as well as myself and the crew and the rest of us if you continue doing what you're doing. This scares me. And I want to make sure this doesn't happen. Now, understand, that's a different conversation, my friends, than going and just chewing this person's ass out to say, what the hell's going on? Why are you doing this? Screw you. Hey, listen, people tend to tune out when you do that. You have to remember, each of you tuning in right now, you are head coaches. And what's the job of a head coach? Al Davis said it best in the 80s, win, baby, win, right? So you have to approach your players in a different way, a different tone, different format. Now, it's important for you to understand that. And so when you can begin to put it on you, say, hey, listen, I'm fearful that I'm going to lose the rest of the team if they see this. I'm fearful that we're going to fall behind the project if you continue to do this kind of behavior. All of a sudden, that opens up for great engagement and communication. The first way, just chewing someone's ass out, shuts down communication. The more we do that, the less we get what we really want. Which, truth be told, we want better behavior. We want that person to show up on time. We want that person to be motivated to work well. You don't get that with option one. With option two, separating the trigger from the cause, discovering the real source of anger, and then communicating it assertively, man, you get amazing results, right? Now, the last thing you have to understand to have the right skill set. Sometimes that conversation still may not go well. So what do? Well, you have to learn anger and stress reduction techniques, right? Such as walking away, right? Such as saying, hey, listen, let's table this conversation. Let's come back at a later date, right? Such as breathing because you may not deal with it right in the moment. Such as saying, hey, listen, I need to pause. I need to go back and think and really begin to spend some time with yourself so that you can make sure that you do have a better understanding of the situation. By doing those four things, my friends, you can have a better skill set and really begin to manage anger really, really well. Now, it comes down to, number one, knowing the skill to do it, but knowing something a little deeper. And we like to call these knowing your anger ABCs, right? Knowing your anger ABCs. And so what are your anger ABCs? Well, the A stands for understanding your anger triggers. What triggers you? What triggers you? If we're being honest, for most people, it's only 1 to 3 things that kind of trigger you, that piss you off, right? If you have 100 things, you may need to really go to counseling to get anger management. Let's be honest. You may have more issues than we can solve on this show today, right? If you have 100 or more. But for most people, you can kind of identify, 3 things that kind of piss you off. If I'm just playing around today and we're putting Alex on center stage here, for me, number 1 is disrespect. Oh, especially from a kid. Oh, man, that shit drives me insane, right? And I'll tell you why a little later, but disrespect is something that drives me insane. The lack of effort. Oh, man, dude. Whew, that can take me through the roof. The lack of effort, right? Someone half-assing it, man, that just drives me through the roof. Those are 2 major anger triggers for me. So knowing that helps me get ahead of that curve of anger, helps me get ahead of the curve of anger. So when we talk about getting in front of the fight or flight, me knowing that helps me say, whoa, pump your brakes, Alex. The person has highlighted this in you. So, hey, how do we handle it? So number 1, knowing your anger trigger helps. Number 2 is the B, which is the belief. Ooh, that's important. So number 1, know your anger triggers. Number 2, the belief. What belief does that trigger make you think about? Right? Because understand this, all of us, my friends, tell ourselves stories. Yes, we do. We tell ourselves stories based on people's actions, based on what we see. We interpret that and we tell ourselves stories. Now, so let's go back to Alex's example, my example. So if I say number 1 is disrespect, right? Disrespect. And so what belief do I have? Well, especially when kids do it. To me, it's a sense of entitlement, them thinking they know. It's them trying to show up an adult, right, in those situations. And so that just drives me insane. If you go to my second example of lack of effort, to me, it just says that a person's sorry. It says that that person doesn't care about their work, doesn't care about me, doesn't care about the team. When truth be told, none of those may be true. Those are all beliefs that I have assigned and attached to my anger triggers, right? So it's important for me to slow down a little bit because the C are consequences. So understanding your anger triggers? What beliefs are you telling yourself about it? And if you follow those beliefs, my friends, what consequences do you have, right? So for me, the consequence is often making wrong assumptions about people, wrong assumptions about individuals, simply because I viewed them through my lens. I haven't given them the chance to talk, to open up, to share what may be going on in their world, right? So understand, knowing your anger triggers helps you a ton in mastering your interactions with people. So how do you do it? How do you do it? Well, as we land the plane on this segment, there's a couple things I want you to understand. You have to ask yourself questions. You got to talk to yourself. Yeah, we all do it. Trust me, we all talk to ourselves. And those who do it well can master this thing called anger. Couple questions I have in my show notes. Number one, ask yourself this: will this really matter tomorrow, next week, or next month? Right? Whatever the situation is, will it matter tomorrow? Will it matter next week? Will it matter next month? If I'm asking you and we're being honest, there are some things I can ask that happened to you 5 years ago to say, hey, listen, is that still important? And most people say, well, you can't even remember what it was, right? So asking that question can help. The second thing is there that you can ask yourself, is there another way to look at this particular event? Is there another way to see it? Can I frame it up differently, right? By doing that allows you to really begin to analyze it. The next question is, what's the worst thing that can happen? By asking that question, you can begin to play out those scenarios in your mind and really begin to calm yourself down and walk yourself off the ledge so it doesn't hurt that bad, because you begin to look at all the possibilities there, right? The next one is, hey, am I thinking about this in the right lens or in the right line or viewpoint, right? Am I thinking about it right? And then last but not least, how important is it to give a reaction to this? Because let's be honest, my friends, a lot of things, especially things that don't matter tomorrow, don't matter next week, next month, some things you can save your energy and not even give a response to it. So understanding, asking those questions helps a ton with that, right? So those are the right skill sets to make sure you manage this thing called anger. And if you can do that really, really well, you can get ahead of it and you can do a phenomenal job of keeping your team together, creating open dialogue to be able to talk to that person one-on-one, do a phenomenal job of correcting the behavior that you want to win as a head coach. All right. Now, in the next segment, we're going to really begin to talk about the foundation of our thinking and our thoughts, and talk about these things called hot thoughts, how all of us have hot thoughts and how at times it blows us up because we take those hot thoughts, we begin to do all kind of crazy things as a result of it moving our emotions, and it makes us act out of character. So you want to tune into the foundation. You don't want to miss it, my friends, as we really begin to dive into what you can do personally to really begin to set the foundation to manage this thing called anger. I'll see you in the next segment. So I want to thank you again for tuning in to No Bullshit with Alex Willis, the #1 source for leadership development in the construction industry. Make sure you subscribe wherever you get your podcast, and please, 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 don't forget to hit play on that next segment.